Carol Malone, the journalist, she said, I used to live near a council estate and it was full of people like Carol Matthews, as though somehow people in council estates were all running around kidnapping their children. And another journalist, for example, Melanie Reid, said, what was once a working class is now in some places an underclass. It is a decline that this unfortunate woman seems to embody. So it was this idea, this is the tip of the iceberg, and the way it then became used not just by journalists but by politicians. So Ian Duncan Smith, he said, he said it was as though a door onto another world has opened slightly and the rest of Britain can peer in. And then he then linked it to a proposal to give some of the 10 million people in social housing in this country the right to have a stake in their own property as a reward for what they described as good behaviour, an expression normally reserved for pets, children, prisoners. But it was that, again, that use as a political, this Carol Matthews case is not a one-off. This gives us an insight into what's happened to communities like this. Now, when I looked at kind of a wider, and part of it, and I think this is what the media often were more interested in for fair enough populist reasons, I guess, was kind of how culture, like what's on TV, how that's kind of changed. And my argument was that, and many people, not everyone in the room will know this, like myself. Now I can see some people definitely wouldn't be around for these shows. But there is even though, and it's easy to get dewy-eyed about the way TV dealt with working class people and communities in the post-war period, and often it was two-dimensional, a bit patronising, but there was an attempt to have positive representations of people who live in working class communities. Now take Coronation Street when it first started in 1960. I mean, it's very different from how it was today, and the characters, weren't the kind of very much larger than life characters you have today with the same sensationalist plots. There was some attempt to show that a community like that in Manchester and how it existed on a day-to-day basis. And then you had a whole range of sitcoms. You had things like The Likely Lads, you had The Good Life, and in The Good Life, middle-class people often on the receiving end of jokes. You had The Rag Trade, which is, unthinkable today. That showed female trade unionists who took on their bosses and normally won in a positive light. And the idea of having a sitcom like that today is obviously impossible. You had, Only Fools and Horses. And that's an interesting example because Del Boy was a bit of a clown, wasn't he, for people who watched it? It was a bit of a joke, but you laughed with him. You rooted for him. It wasn't the same snide sort of caricatures you'd see today. And then you have, I'll read just and so on up to the 80s. But what changed was you got either kind of positive, kind of middle-class characters, if you like. I suppose My Family would be an interesting example of a sitcom like that. Or grotesque caricatures on the other end. And I suppose for many people that would probably be, Vicky Pollard would be the ultimate example. And many of you might have laughed at Vicky Pollard. I know some of my friends, I don't even think Little Britain's funny though, objectively. Anyway, apart from that. But when people laugh at that, they're laughing at a privately educated, millionaire comedian dressing up as this grotesque caricature of a single mum from a white working class background who's so thick she swaps one of the children for a Westlife CD. And what's disturbing about that is at the Edinburgh Festival, actually, funny enough, a few years ago, they did a poll of people who work in TV, and over 70% said that she was an accurate representation of the white working class. And it's interesting actually because she's often used by journalists in particular as a kind of political prop. Do people know who James Bellimpole is? Oh, he's a clown. I had to debate him once, and this was a brilliant topic. He argued that posh people are the last discriminated group in Britain. Apart from the fact they run the country. That's fine. Anyway, so he said, the last discriminated group in Britain were white, middle-aged, public school and Oxford educated middle-class male. Oh, they have a terrible time, don't they? Honestly. There needs to be some sort of civil rights movement. Anyway, he said the Vicky Pollards and the Waynes and Waynettes of our world have got it coming to them. If they weren't quite so repellent, we wouldn't need to make jokes about them, would we? The reason Vicky Pollard caught the public imagination is that she embodies with such fearful accuracy several of the great scourges of contemporary Britain. Aggressive, all-female gangs of embittered, hormonal drunken teenagers. Gym-slit mums who choose to get pregnant as a career option. Pasty-faced, large-footed slappers who drop their knickers in the blink of an eye. dismal, ineducable. He goes on.
I know.
So, I mean, it's that use as this kind of caricature. It's an interesting example like Vicky Pollard, because you never get any positive representations of working class single mums in particular. I mean, if you look actually, the facts of single parents, only 1 in 50 single parents are even teenagers. Over 60% are in work, despite how difficult it is if you're a single parent to actually juggle having a job and raise children at the same time. And most of them want to work, as all the studies have shown, if they actually have the, I mean, the childcare obviously in this country is absolutely is terrible in lots of cases, but that is the sort of caricature you get with no kind of look at the reality. So that's what that's the kind of the way culturally you get middle class people on one side and then the chavs on the other. So what I want to do first is look at in the book why that happened. Now, Thatcher doesn't come off that well, if I'm honest. There's a bit of a boost in that. I looked at, so a lot of this, unsurprisingly, I think can be traced back to Thatcherism. And in fact, funny enough, it's good to come back to Glasgow, because the first march I ever went on when I was 5 years old was an anti-poll tax march from my parents here in Glasgow. It was great to be back here, and because I used to live in Falkirk, and my parents were amongst the non-payees in that particular campaign. So there were great struggles against Thatcherism, like the movement, the great movement against the poll tax. But in the 80s, what I'd argue is there was an assault, a huge assault on the pillars of working class Britain. So what you had, for example, the attack on the trade unions. Over half of all workers in 1979 were members of unions, and they were battered by mass unemployment, for example. In fact, I don't know if people know Sir Alan Budd. He was recently put in charge of the Tories' Office of Budget Responsibility, I think it is, and he advised Thatcher government. And he, in the early 90s, he said he suspected that the government never believed for a moment that this was the correct way to bring down inflation. They did, however, see it would be a very, very good way to raise unemployment, and unemployment was an extremely desirable way of reducing the strength of the working classes. So there was this attack in terms of, because of through mass unemployment, the defeats suffered by trade unionists, with the miners' strike being that great culmination in 1985, and after that people felt the miners can't win, then we can't win. And then the anti-union laws. So the unions were attacked in a very severe way. We had the destruction of industries which sustained entire communities, not to get rose-tinted about it. Often the jobs were dirty, back-breaking, women were often excluded from many of those jobs. But they were the beating heart, if you like, of a lot of communities. And they were attacked, and also the sense that people had pride in a lot of those jobs, which is never replicated in lots of cases. You had an attack as well on, because of council housing, they didn't replace the stock sold off because of the right to buy, and then it became just reserved with the idea it was a kind of a social dumping ground, the way governments treated council housing. So you had an attack on an idea like solidarity in favour of rugged individualism. You pull yourself up by your own bootstraps to get on in life. So the political consensus you got that most mainstream politicians and journalists embraced back in the late 80s was everyone should aspire to be middle class, and if you don't, then you were somehow to blame for your own personal inadequacies. So that I thought was at the heart of it, as well as the huge inequality that grew in this period.